overall. Number three, I do believe that I will, when I want to prescribe omega-3 fatty acids, I will be using exclusively pure EPA products going forward, which from a brand perspective is Vascepa alone, and where cost is a barrier, which is an overwhelming number of people that I see, I will not be shy about turning to dietary supplements, even though they weren't studying the trial and even though they don't have the same purity standards because they're not regulated by the FDA, but because they're more affordable to patients in general compared to the brand product. So that's sort of where things sit today for me. Mm-hmm. And the only thing that further analyses run the risk of doing is if the FDA does a lot more analyses and says, wait a minute now, we're really firmly convinced that this vastly stacked the deck in a favorable fashion for Vascepa, then it opens up the possibility that it just ratchets back my use of the product overall that much more. But I already today, you have someone who drank the Kool-Aid a little bit, and then I got people whose triglycerides are, 350, 380, and they're not greater than 500, who based on, previous data was, I wouldn't say bullish, but was willing to prescribe Vascepa beforehand. I now at least have outcomes data that provides and puts it in perspective to share a little bit more information in that regard. So that's sort of where things sit for me as of at least today.
And what does that number of patients that you have in that bucket look like? In that 350, people who have triglycerides that are 380 or higher? Where you said you're willing to prescribe, you were willing, prior to the data to prescribe.
So I would say I might have 50 or 55 patients on Vascepa today. Of those individuals, about half are people who have triglycerides greater than or equal to 500, and the remaining half are people who have triglycerides that are elevated, but most of them have triglycerides that are certainly above 250 and usually above 300. What Reduce It does for me is potentially expand to a greater number of individuals who have more modest elevations of triglycerides overall and what impact that has in that regard. What's interesting is, and I would want to see this a little bit more, they break down in the primary publication of baseline triglycerides greater or equal to 200 or less than 200. There's a consistent benefit. Then they do a breakdown into greater than or equal to 150 and less than 150, and there's a consistent benefit in terms of the point estimate in the forest plot. But it'd be sort of nice to know, is there any sort of trending? So the 150 to 200 is sort of in the same range, but, less than 150, 150 to 250, 250 to, 400, greater than 400. I'm just trying to think of ways in which you could see, is there any relationship between baseline triglycerides and the magnitude of impact overall? And all we get is sort of a above or below the line, depending upon whether you took the original entry criteria or the subsequent entry criteria when the protocol was modified. So I think I will feel that much more comfortable in people with triglycerides in the 250, 300 range and higher utilizing Vascepa in them to a greater degree. I really am going to wonder, even though the data suggests that for triglycerides less than 200 and less than 150, there were persistent benefits overall, I'm going to wait a greater amount of the subgroup or further analyses from the FDA to help frame that conversation overall. And this may sound academic, but if the FDA says, 30% of the contribution of Vascepa was related to an imbalance in events created by the use of mineral oil, or 20% of it was, that could be the difference, even though it was an extremely strong p-value. That could be the difference between statistical significance and lack thereof. And it's beyond my area of expertise to know how to model or predict that. But I think, there's some people out there, obviously, as is raised in the Forbes article, asking the question, how much did this contribute? And where it didn't contribute, we're doing a lot of hand waving, but as Ethan Weiss said, is this due to anti-inflammatory effects? Is this due to